All right, so going to keep going with the discussion on Lauren Chen. So basically, Lauren Chen, of course, being the ringleader of this whole situation, she's the one who was in charge of Tenet Media. Not one of its bigger influencers by the numbers that she pulls in, but again, was in charge of handing out this money to everyone, of arranging for this money. So she's the primary one. Once more, she's a Canadian citizen who lives in the U.S., similar to Lauren Southern. So, of course, that's sort of why some people might get the two of them confused. But, anyways, yeah. So, we start off with Kareem Rafi, who has found a few different posts from Lauren Chen. This is kind of interesting because, of course, Syrian issues being very dear to this person here. So he points out that she is a hyper supporter of Assad, has apparently been that way since 2018. Yeah. So here we see Lauren Chen, quote, quote, no solid proof Assad used them, of course referring to chemical weapons used on civilians. And even then, no, the U.S. does not have the authority to strike a sovereign country. Fascinating, isn't it, that she goes and uses that argument, and then, of course, she's going to go and be hyper supportive of Russia attacking Ukraine. So just remember that, right? It's always a double standard with these people. It's always applied in an anti-Western way. And remember, this is what the libertarians have been doing for a long time, like the libertarian infiltration of the right that has been one of the defining factors in creating this new right. All right. And then she also has a post from June 5th, 2021. I don't know, kind of just sounds like Assad is the most popular president in Syrian history. Stop trying to undermine democracy. All right. So just keep that in mind. Like, this is who she is. She's been supporting authoritarians for a long time. So, yeah, never mind. This isn't a very intelligent person, right? This is why she would even go and get caught with that $10 million bribe, because remember, like, the actual guys that are clever in this whole situation, they don't get money directly from Russian businessmen, right? Like, they get money from millionaires and billionaires that have dealings in Russia but are not Russian directly, right? That have, like, those guys might get money funneled to Russia from Russia via, business ventures and that sort of thing. But it'll basically be like, keep a degree of separation between you and the source that you're conducting propaganda for. And of course, this is what Lauren Chen absolutely failed to do, which is why she's, again, a fairly dumb agent of the whole system, right? All right. This is from April 21st. And well, I'll note here that she's quoting Michael Tracy, who once more is a far left journalist, right? So again, this is Lauren Chen, who's allegedly this, far right person, right? And then she's quoting like the far left. Remember, it's like the horseshoe theory, right? Where, the ends of the horseshoe come together, the pieces at the center, right? The other end come together more. So this is what you're seeing, okay? And basically, yeah, so Lauren Chen says, to any right-wingers that are still in favor of aid to Ukraine, note that CNN and the Democrats all agree with you. Perhaps food for thought? No. So again, pushing political polarization. It's like, oh, the Democrats want something, ergo, no, we're not going to go and, support them. And so, simply for the fact that Speaker Johnson went and, agreed to finally pass the aid bill, which is, again, is after Donald Trump was engaging in that massive obstruction of it, right? Like, under orders from Trump, the Republicans were engaging in that obstruction. So finally they go and pass it. And then, of course, these people who are on the new right then go and hyper criticize them for doing that. And this is one of the ways that they got the previous speaker, of course, out of the system, right? Where it's like, oh, Speaker McCarthy doesn't go and agree with us. Well, now suddenly we're going to go and start up a revolt against Speaker McCarthy, right? All right. And yep, so here directly quoting Tenet Media. Ben Shapiro is frustrated that the GOP House isn't able to pass foreign aid packages for Ukraine and Israel. He blames a small group of malcontents for holding up the legislation. So a reminder for those who don't know how exactly this happens when there's actually majority support for the aid bills in Congress. Well, basically what happens is that the Republicans have this rather poor doctrine, okay, where they have to go and pass legislation without the approval of the Democrats when they're the majority in the House, okay? Now this might work fine if your entire party is just lockstep in with agreeing with you, right? But what ends up happening is that it doesn't take very many people to go and obstruct you. So a reminder that the Republicans only have, like a very few, like a very slim margin majority in Congress, right? So what ends up happening is that if, let's say just 5 or 10 Republicans disagree with what the party is doing and that says, oh, we're not going to vote for this legislation, they cannot go and bring it forward, right? And so finally they've had to do some compromises and actually bring this stuff forward with the understanding that a bunch of their members are going to be voting against it, right? So that's just something to note, that is a major thing that happens in Congress. Historically speaking, at least recently, the Democrats have been a bit more, they have their disagreements, right? But they're a bit more saying we're going to do this stuff as a party. The Republicans, again, have all these different wings that are trying to go and work against the other parts of the party, right? So in the Democrats, that's kind of a lot more of a minimal wing. It's like 8 people, historically speaking. I think it's down to 6, and even then, like, AOC, right, isn't really even, like, she can be swayed to do different stuff that you want, so it's, like, really more like 4 or 5 people that kind of can obstruct you as far as the Democratic Party goes. And once more, it's like, that's just how it is. And so then Lauren Chen says, if Republican gridlock means no money for Israel and Ukraine, I'm all for it. Might as well extend that recess till January 2025. So again, just wants Congress to be paralyzed, not able to do anything. You'll notice remember that she works for the TPUSA, right? But the primary difference is TPUSA also hates Ukraine, but likes Israel, whereas Lauren Chen hates both Israel and Ukraine. So that's what you're going to be seeing throughout all of her different posts, right? And of course, she's one of the people who dogpiled on Ben Shapiro, really hates Ben Shapiro, and was part of that entire little group that was trying to go and, set the right wing against Ben Shapiro and against Jews in general as far as their participation in the American right is concerned. All right. And of course, going to be ranting about Nikki Haley. When Nikki Haley talks about Americans, it's mostly cut this, cut that, less spending. When Nikki Haley talks about Ukraine and Israel, it's more weapons, more aid. She's not looking to represent Americans. So once more, it's like this whole isolationist deal. Oh, we have to keep all the money to ourselves. Our money that we get in America totally doesn't depend upon us having stable commercial relations with a whole bunch of different allied nations around the world. It totally doesn't depend on that, right? Like, just ridiculous stuff, right? All right, then Nikki Haley says, unlike Ron, I've been clear about my position on Ukraine. No American troops, no cash, no blank checks. Give Ukraine the weapons it needs to defend its sovereignty and defeat Vladimir Putin. This is about preventing war. Laura Chen. These are the people and groups flooding America's borders and taking refuge in American schools. Do they look and sound Russian to you? How about you start worrying about America's sovereignty instead of Ukraine's? So once more, that'll probably be like cartels or that sort of thing. But, as has been pointed out, like the Russians, they fund cartels. They historically funded the left-wing, cartel movements in South America, Central America, right? So this is, and of course, I say left-wing, right? Like the cartels are really just the cartels, right? It's like they're not like idealists in that sort of sense, right? It's just a lot of them were essentially like politically convenient. And I should mention, like there have also been like right-wing militia groups in the South America that have got engaged in drug trafficking, that sort of thing. So it's like I'm not being politically polarized here, but I'm pointing out like your FARCs and that sort of thing, historically come out of the left in a lot of those ways. And then in Mexico, of course, they're like, they're not like polarized like political wings. It's just that they do still, a lot of those ones still do get like the funding from Russia. And there was also, interesting enough, even like a Hamas component that was in there that was funding like cartels. So it's like, yeah, just some crazy geopolitical stuff that happens, right? That just the forces of degeneration and death want to go and inflict on the world. Alrighty, Jesse Walters. McCarthy lost his gavel after Matt Gaetz led an uprising against him. McCarthy says 8 Republicans just handed the House to the Democrats. Laura Chen, are you happy now, Gaetz? Now you'll have Democrats in charge who will fail to secure the border, who funnel money to Ukraine, throw Trump under the bus, and fail to hold Biden accountable for his corruption, instead of Kevin McCarthy, who also does all those exact same things. Alright, so it's like, I guess her point is like there's no difference between the two. It's like, I don't know, weird stuff. But once more, she also has like a bit of a bitter streak against Trump, which is sort of an interesting factor. You kind of saw that earlier with, so, 2018, this would have been when Trump did that big, massive airstrike in Syria, and then it was also, her complaining about it. So, it's what's worse, one of those things where, like, we have to... See, again, it's like, it's one of those really weird things about Trump where it's like, you never, like, we don't know how exactly the guy wants to go and handle things, because it's like he makes all these different statements, and we just know that he has, like, this admiration he expresses for these different dictators, even though he's, like, he's attacked them in the past. Like, there was that case in Syria where he, had that, where he, like, literally bombed that big Russian battalion and then basically annihilated the thing in, like, 10 seconds or something. So it was the most recent mass engagement of U.S. troops against the Russians, right, that happened in Syria. So just it was under the branch of, Russian contractors, right? But it's like, it's just being unpredictable. That's just, it's a very hard thing to go and recommend that people, go and vote for something that is unpredictable. Well, there's something that's, predictable, even if at times the Democrats can be pretty mediocre on foreign policy. It's like, they're at least still predictable in what they want to go and do and what they have said they're going to do. So, and then maybe, Kamala Harris is more aggressive on the front than Joe Biden. You never know, right? Alrighty, Nikki Haley. We're down 25% recruitment for our military. Why is that happening? We're focused on all the wrong things. Stop making them take gender pronoun classes. We have to be mission focused. Rears add context. Recruitment is down slightly. Her claim of 25% is misleading as it's not compared to a baseline. Yeah, so basically, like, essentially what's happened, right, in terms of military recruitment, if you want to know, right, is just that your Gen Zs are less generally patriotic than your millennials, right? That's just the reality of the situation, and it's just, again, you've had a lot of basically social depression that's been pushed via media, schools, these sorts of things, to be like, oh, you should always be skeptical of your country and, not be proud of things, and there's just been a lot of that, and we're not on the right side in our conflicts in the world, right? Like, there's been all this stuff that's been constantly hammered into people ever since the 2000s, right? Really, the Iraq War, the Afghan War, right? So though it's not turning out very well, that has given the forces that want to go and push social depression a lot of force, and then because that goes and factors into your various different people, and then of course you have all these different. The vast majority of recruits, right, like, 92%, like that sort of thing, are going to be young men, right, for the military. And so, of course, you've had a lot of depression propaganda focused against young men specifically by, guys like Andrew Tate and Manosphere, to be like, oh, be socially depressed in how you look at society, and society doesn't work for you, society is against you, etc., etc. And then, of course, there are some institutional problems in these military organizations. Their hierarchies, right? And so they have the same. You run into the same issue that you run into with everywhere else in the Western world, which is simply that the Western middle class is not nearly as intelligent and above it all as it thinks it is. So, okay. But anyways, as far as look at Lauren Chen. So this is what she says. American flyover kids that fill the ranks aren't interested in becoming can fodder for Ukraine or Israel's conflicts to boost your war portfolio, Karen. They also know they aren't fighting for the same regime their fathers or grandfathers fought for, but one that's hostile to them and their forefathers who founded and built this nation. It's a lot more than just pronoun classes pushing them away. So again, just false in every single way. Nikki Haley doesn't have the correct idea here. I mean, somewhat correct that you're probably getting more conservatives into the military. At least if you talk about recruits who are there for patriotic reasons. Remember, there's an entire group of recruits that are in the U.S. military. They're there simply because they get college paid for, right? So these are like the poor people who go into the military. There's a lot of people that are like that, or simply people who just don't have anything else to do, right? So, it's not just people who are there because they want to be patriotic, right? There are different reasons, and of course there are left-wing people that are patriotic, right? Who would be like, yes, we are for gender pronouns and that sort of thing, right? So there are those types too. Probably a higher percentage in the officer class, definitely, just because of the way that those how you get to be an officer works, right? Going through the university system and that sort of thing. All right, but so basically, again, like Ukraine. Remember, Ukraine. The military is hyper supportive of Ukraine, like your average soldier in the military, hyper supportive of Ukraine. As far as Israel goes, perhaps less so, but also still, there's a great deal of support for Israel in the military. Okay. And then, of course, just accusing her of being corrupt, war portfolio, Karen, it's again, this is false. Nikki Haley had to put up with a lot of, garbage from these people because, of course, she was the Republican candidate that Putin and China and all these other types of people, they actually feared getting in, right? Because she was the one that would have been probably even stronger as a president than your Democratic equivalents, right? Even though the problem there with Nikki Haley has always been that the composition of the Republicans that would have been supporting her, well, yes, some of them would have been cowed by a Trump lost to Nikki Haley in the election. The issue is that she still has to deal with a bunch of MAGAs, right? And again, that's a very thin majority in the House, right? And it is the minority in the Senate. So basically, you're dealing with now suddenly trying to have to go and work deals between the Congress Republicans and the Democrats to go and get stuff passed, which is again against their general philosophy, which of course needs to be discarded. But anyways, because you don't actually have a majority if you go and elect Nikki Haley, you have a minority because there's an entire group of Republicans who will not go and support you, right? Because they will say I'm only following Donald Trump. We will not follow anyone else. We wouldn't follow Nikki Haley, right? And of course, there's also this big deal on the far right and it's in the far left as well, right? Where Indians just get hated, right? So her being Punjabi and her lineage, right? I know she has her husband's last name, right? But I know that her Nikki is actually an Indian name, right? That's her nickname. It's just I know that Nikki is also relatively common as far as our names, as far as Western names go. Of course, it's entirely it's entirely spelled differently. It's usually Nicky, right? Nikki, compared to the Indian version here, which is Nikki. But anyway, so that's sort of the Nikki Haley deal, right? And Also note that she immediately calls again the democratically elected governments regimes, which is again just this is a propaganda term, right? This is the term that you use for governments that are not elected, democratically. This regime once more calls back to monarchy, that sort of thing. And so yeah, in a lot of places that don't hold elections for their leader or have false forged elections for their leader, well, that's where you get into this concept of there being a presidential regime, right? But once more, you can't go and say that there is this sort of regime. Once more, the Republicans were in the term before this, right? Donald Trump was in the term before this. Then it's Joe Biden. Like, that does not a regime make. Like, for that to be a regime, you'd have to go and say, oh, the Democrats, win this election, then the next one, and then you go and they're doing something that the elections are not legitimate. But again, there's no indication that the Biden election was not a legitimate election, right? So that's just an issue, right? And that's like they're hostile to them. Again, this isn't what's going on. The thing that we have to remember about these people is that they're failing to go and separate out the liberals, right? Which the typical democratic ideas are liberalism, oftentimes left liberalism, yes, but associated with liberalism, and then they don't go and disassociate that from the far left, right? Where it's like the far left has made it quite clear that they really despise and hate the Democratic Party, like as it is currently composed. Like, remember when Joe Biden was elected as president, right? You go look at what happened in Portland. There were riots from Antifa, right? That were really, really ticked off. They were going and breaking the local headquarters of the Democrats in the districts, right? They were going to do these sorts of things. And so the fact that there exists sort of this, like there exists a sort of fondness, unfortunately, when you go and look at the left and right, between them and the radicals. So it's like you'll see, right-wingers sometimes sticking up for groups like, the Proud Boys and this sort of thing, and then left-wingers sometimes go and stick up for Antifa groups, right? But we should understand that the far wings, right, they're not supportive of liberalism, right? They all want to go and destroy liberalism. Like, that's their number one goal, their number one enemy. Their tactics that they use would not work against what they actually go and claim they're fighting against. So, like, if you're on the far right, like, the tactics they're using would not work if they were actually fighting, like, a communist state. And neither would the anti-fascist tactics work if they were actually fighting a fascist state. Like, that's just the reality. These things are all designed to go and attack liberalism, which, once more, this is what the Democratic Party represents. So, yeah. All right, Chen, with the $95 billion in foreign aid the Senate approved, the U.S. could instead give 3.8 million American pensioners $25,000 each. There's already been about $75 billion sent to Ukraine, which could have given $25,000 to 3 million American retirees. If Republicans are concerned about government spending, it's absolutely wild to me that some of them would rather cut off grandma than foreign leaders. Also, it's technically grandma's own money anyways. What does that do, actually? Like literally. So here's the thing, okay? Like, literally, for starters, the U.S. has way more money to throw around to social systems than this. Like, people don't quite fathom just how much money the U.S. government has to throw at different things, right? So it's like this is like giving a fraction of the military budget to Ukraine. And again, most of that isn't even going to Ukraine, right? The vast majority of it is being spent in America, and it's on American, goods and that sort of thing, right? So American replacements for the military weapons. So, and yeah, $25,000, I'm bluntly, probably doesn't even buy you a year of care, like just intensive home care, if that's what need, like intensive assistance, like I think the number for that is more like $35,000 or $40,000, like unironically in the U.S. To go and have like a nurse come in, these sorts of things, like it's very expensive, right? So $25,000 doesn't do anything for people, right? Like it's as big of a joke as what I pointed out, that whole Tim Pool little scam where he's like, oh, it's that why don't we give $200 billion that we sent to Ukraine and then go and give it up to the African Americans as reparations. I'm like, yeah, congratulations. That gives each African American in the U.S. $6,500. It's like that's nothing, right? Like they literally make that in like half a year, right? Like just it's ridiculous stuff. Just absolutely ridiculous, right? And of course, like I pointed out, like that would never be something that actually got through with a Republican Party, but all right, and then yeah, I'm not really interested in what's going down there. Okay, but it's like they're not cutting off grandma. Nope. Once more, these are entire, like this is part of the discretionary budget that's given to the the U.S. military. It's not like the U.S. has separate things that it does for Social Security and that. All right, this is Thomas Massey. Let's zoom in a little bit here. The speaker, remember, this is the big this is a big MAGA guy. He also is one of those like hardcore Christian types who hates both Israel and Ukraine. So complete supporter of this new right movement, right? The speaker just announced that next week the House will vote on a clean bill to send Israel $14.3 billion. Israel has a lower debt to GDP ratio than the United States. This spending package has no offset, so it'll increase our debt by $14.3 billion, and he's, of course, disagreeing with that. Yeah, that's from Mike Johnson that down there. So, of course, again, once more, he's a guy who despises Israel. Of course, he's going to be disagreeing with that in the Post. Lauren Chen, thank you. Neither Ukraine nor Israel should be allowed to loot the coffers of the American taxpayers, especially when America's borders are in such neglected disarray. All right, and we covered how those borders got that way in the first place. All right. Lauren Chen, work until your deathbed so we can continue sending money to Israel and Ukraine. Bold strategy meme. Once more, you'll note that she doesn't get the sort of views that any of the other like major influencers get. Like again, this post got 16,000. Remember, like Tim Pool can sometimes pull in like, over 1 million impressions. Benny Johnson was getting like 500,000 impressions. So again, Laura Chen, people aren't really interested in hearing what she personally has to say, but she is the one running the Tenet media organization. So this is what makes her notable, I suppose. But of course, sometimes she pulls in bigger numbers, so we'll see. Americans are still bickering about the Middle East and Ukraine over which side of a conflict to fund or how much, but they're mad because you send a tweet about how you like Trump because, that would be foreign interference and we can't have that. All right. Replying to Nikki Haley, you want to send our kids to die in Ukraine and Israel? Once more, she hasn't. Remember what Nikki Haley wanted to go and supply weapon systems and just to, supply a lot more than the Democrats were supplying. Like that's kind of what Nikki Haley was talking about. But because remember, like the, people have pointed out, like for example, you could literally be sent, the U.S. sent like 30 Abrams tanks. You could literally send 500, you have literally that much in storage. You could send that many, so it's like an actual number. You could send like 1,000 more Bradleys, like, and these won't be. This is just stuff that's just sitting out in the desert. It's not really doing anything. It's like non-active duty, so it's just stuff that you can be doing. But again, like, I suppose it's at least some stuff is getting sent, right? Bullshit. I am also openly against the U.S. funding Ukraine. I've spoken about that many times. If the people of Texas were majority Mexican and they voted to join Mexico, I wouldn't start bombing them, which is what Ukraine did. No, well, what's more, like, just a false, false thing. Oh, spheres of influence. The U.S. has no problem dictating what a sovereign country like Cuba does, and it's exactly the same reason Russia doesn't want NATO missiles in Ukraine. What's more, like, Cuba made itself an active threat to the U.S. by trying to go and store Soviet nukes in itself. Like, what do you think was going to happen? And Cuba was also funding a whole bunch of different revolutionary movements in, South America, communist movements in, South America, Africa. So it's like they even had like troop contingents that fought Israel in several wars. Like Cuba got a whole bunch of places, and then that's why they ended up getting the blockade slammed on them, because they were an ally of literally your enemy. And then, of course, the spheres of influence thing is once more going back to that whole, multipolar world, right, where they want to go and have all these little empires that have their own spheres that dictate what all the countries around them do. True, but Luber has been critical of Zelensky herself and Ukraine funding, so I don't believe she alleged Massey was anti-Semitic when he skipped his address to Congress. So I believe that she must have asserted that Thomas Massey was anti-Semitic for skipping the address of Netanyahu to Congress. I believe that's what's going on there. But anyways, yeah, all the... By the way, I remember there's some talk that, the right is very unified. No, the right has all these people who absolutely despise and hate one another. It's literally hilarious, like, just how little they could get along with one another. So just, just funny, right? RD, I never argued against familiarizing ourselves with the reasons behind the war in Ukraine. In fact, if people were more familiar with the region and its history, the war could have been avoided entirely. But you'd think knowledge of the conflict in country would be especially important for someone who believes the U.S. should be directly involved like Haley does. The war could have... Again, it's like... Nothing about the war... The war has everything to do with Russia's expansionist mindset and their need to go and offer what they consider to be a challenge to NATO, okay? Like, those are the two things. And by the way, if you want to know about that second part, like, go and look up the speeches of where Putin was justifying, absorbing those 4 regions of Ukraine, the 4 oblasts, into Russia, right? Where he wanted to go and annex them. If you go and look up at that speech, he has almost nothing to go and say about Ukraine. It's everything to say, oh, I hate the West, I'm going against the West, blah, blah, blah. So Ukraine borderline doesn't even factor into his mentality there. Like, this is literally, I'm at war with the West, right? Like, that's, I'm going to go take this land that the West is offering to protect, and, this is going to be my first, foray against them, right? And of course, had he been successful in that initial assault on Ukraine, in overwhelming the defenses, well, of course, he would have, very rapidly gone and tested out the Western resolve in NATO by going and invading the Baltics, right? It's like, does NATO care about these, 4 or 5 million people who live in the Baltic states, those 3 Baltic countries? Like, do they care about them enough to go and defend them? Or are they just going to go and let me take them? Then there's also this one island that Sweden has where, before Sweden joined NATO, there was some speculation that the Russians were going to go and try and seize that island and, give themselves like this central base essentially between like Sweden and Germany, right? So it's like, does NATO care about its red lights enough so that we could take apart Sweden, right? This is how the Russian thinks, right? And this is why all the Eastern European countries, they understand this, right? But our Western academics, like the Western policymakers, they oftentimes have no idea, or again, they're pretty openly just pro-Russia, so they just want them to go win, right? Ukraine is also complicit, like the rest of Congress, in Israel's war. So note that, right, again. So hyper anti-Israel, hyper anti-Ukraine. What definitely would have stopped him would have been the U.S. not installing leaders in Ukraine and expanding NATO eastward, though. So once more, this is talking about Putin and being like, oh, it's the West's fault that Putin had to go and invade a sovereign country, which is like, and once more, like people have pointed out, NATO membership is voluntary and it's joined precisely because people don't want to be invaded by Russia. So Russia just had to not be as aggressive if it didn't want people to go and, invade, to be at like a war standing with it, right? But Russia, of course, has this hyper aggressive mentality where it's always trying to provoke people. And if it's not war, it's always trying to go and try and do like these little violations of territorial sovereignty to go and indicate that, oh, we're better than you, we're superior than you, we can go and get away with sucker punching you and then just turning and smiling and saying, oh, what's the matter, little one, we're Russia, what's the matter, little one, right? Like, this is sort of their mindset, right? Very much, very petty bullying in a lot of ways is what it amounts to, but they have these whole grandiose visions that they claim to justify that. But anyways, like, obviously, again, it's like, oh, it's all the West's fault, it's all Ukraine's fault. It's not Putin's fault. Like, it's not the fault of the guy who actually invaded the countries. So, anyways, Nikki Haley says she supports funding Ukraine's war effort. This is about preventing war. Lauren Chen, Nikki Haley should move to Ukraine and run for its presidency then. Spares the American last neocon talking points. So once more, again, these are the libertarians, so we hate America talking points. That's what she is essentially doing. All right. The media war machine is so effective, it seems to have people convinced that Ukraine is a part of America and/or Canada. Hint, it's not. And this is Lauren Chen. You can see she's quoted here. Yeah, personally, I don't think World War III is worth Ukraine keeping separatist regions it hasn't controlled for years or becoming part of the EU or NATO. Call me crazy. So once more, it's like just this ridiculous stuff, right? And people are calling her out for it, right? Like, what if he invaded Alaska? Is that a price you'd be willing to pay? Saying that, Russia invades Canada and claims BC, and Lauren Chen would roll over because, of course, again, it's like that. Yeah, then also just just more fake garbage in the more fake garbage, right? Reminder, by the way, that when they bring this crap up about like pornography and that, Russia is the literal #1 producer of child porn in the world, #1 consumer of it, hyper pornographied society. It goes and affects everything that they do. So this is what you're looking at with Russia. They have terrible perspectives on women, largely also because of their hyper consumption of porn, right? So, and all these things combined together to go and say, again, it's not this traditionalist type of country. And by the way, when they're like ranting against, homosexuality, right? Well, they made a very clear exception for lesbian porn. So, just to be consistent and everything, right? Ridiculous. And a reminder, they support one of their big guys that they're affiliated with is Andrew Tate, who is also a pornographer. So there you go, right? So no, Ukraine is not like actually, if you see Ukrainians in porn, like, it's almost always because they're in some sort of perverts film in Europe, right? Like, where some of those European societies take like a very weak perspective on porn. But anyways, for Lauren Chen, another reminder of why Ukraine isn't worth starting a world war over. All right. Also, I should also mention one last thing, right? Like OnlyFans is like these are two different things, right? Like this is Pornhub is like a crappy site that is run by a crappy Arab businessman in Canada. Like unironically, like one nice thing about the conservatives potentially getting in is that they might actually do something about that. Be like, oh, shut down Pornhub or something. That'd be nice. Because a reminder, this is a crappy site that's been involved in like child exploitation, right? It's the biggest one on the internet, by the way, for like just porn in general, right? But it's been involved in a whole bunch of different scandals, right? Like just underage stuff, just tons of different stuff, right? It's just it's basically as with all pornography, right? It takes advantage of lonely people to go and push lonely and depressed people, and there's a lot of degenerates too, yeah, sure, but takes advantage of all that to go and push you to go and try and buy stuff, and that just very much appealing to like the absolute lowest denominator in your physical form, right? Anyways, yeah. All this woman is missing is BLM and the Ukraine flag. Then she would be all these things. The perfect NBC. So again, it's like, oh, if you believe in supporting Ukraine, you're just an NPC. You're a non-playable character. You're like one of those guys in a little gray mask. And also, someone who is an anarchist. A reminder: these far-left types are actually more often than not against Ukraine. Like they're literally pro-Russia. The largest ones I can think of in the U.S. are almost entirely pro-Russia. So it's like, especially now with the whole Palestine issue, right? Because the Palestine issue with like, there are a bunch of people who are like, oh, Russia supports Palestine, ergo we're going to go and support Russia. Like literally this sort of brain dead mentality doesn't look that intelligent, right? Hashtag queer, hashtag indigenous. Yeah. Is this another one of those persons who's like about 1/16th Native American, ergo? Probably. And again, once more, this is another thing that we have to remember. They're constantly doing this, right? They're like pointing out people who are exceptions, and then they're treating them like they're some sort of norms, right? Just bizarre. Bizarre. Professor. Lord Chen, America's southern border is wide open and under siege. The last thing people of America need to be concerned about is Ukraine's border. So once more, they're hammering the right-wing talking points, right? Oh, our money, our border. Again, it's like none of these issues have anything to do with Ukraine. All these issues are things that are solved, can be solved without diminishing support for Ukraine. The Democrats will probably solve them without diminishing support for Ukraine. So, if anything, this is like the abortion issue, right? The border issue, where if you go and solve it, well, that suddenly goes and takes away one of your big major political talking points, right? So it's oftentimes more convenient to just keep the issue going and push it down the road and just make little adjustments that look like you're doing something but not actually doing something. So, because once you go and have like what we're doing with abortion codified into law in the U.S., right, at a national level, well, suddenly that's an issue fixed. That's generally speaking an issue that you don't have to go and worry about for the future, right? Once you have the border fixed, well, you can only fix the border once, because once it's fixed, right? So that's the thing, right? But it's just simply more convenient for a lot of people to just go and keep pushing these issues just further and further down the road, and then that's what you see done. So and by the way, this doesn't go just for the U.S. This goes for a lot of different political situations where it's oftentimes just convenient to just do moderate adjustments to crisis situations rather than actually going and solving them completely. Alrighty, if we stop funding Ukraine, there will be no Ukraine, okay? Russia and Ukraine were one country before. It's not unthinkable that it could happen again. This doesn't mean I support Russia. I'm just not willing to go further into debt for a foreign sovereignty dispute. So note that, right? Note that it's like Russia and Ukraine were one country before, only ever because Russia went and conquered it, right? Like it was forcibly integrated in it. The the closest you can say about it being ever like agreeing was the agreement that the Cossacks made with the Russian Tsars to go and support them and swear allegiance to them. But then that came at the cost of then the Cossacks being, absorbed by the Russians, right? And then the Russians going and violating their guarantees of autonomy, right? And of course, the Soviets went and conquered the Ukrainian Republic, right? That existed before the Soviet Union, right? It was in that whole breakup of the Imperial Russia. And then that got conquered by the Soviet Union. It fought a war against the Soviet Union. So no, it was not voluntary to go and join that. And it was not voluntary to be a part of Russia. As a bunch of other places, right? Like a bunch of other places in Russia were not voluntarily asked if they wanted to go be part of Russia. They were conquered, right? That's how all of Siberia became Russia, all right? It's like, and this doesn't mean I support Russia. Note that, like, it's always these caveats. I'm going to go and repeat Russian talking points. I'm going to go and be, hyper pro everything that Putin does. But, no, I'm a fence sitter. I'm against both sides, of course, because of course you are, but you're just going and promoting propaganda that goes and benefits Russia. It's like, that's not how someone who claims to be neutral works. It really, once there's a war situation on, like, you don't really have that luxury of being neutral anyways. Like, it's like, are you for the invasion or are you against it? Like, there's no, well, I'm kind of for it and I'm kind of against it. Well, no, that's not how this works, right? And yeah, again, my money, right? Like, just always my money, right? And national debt. Reminder, remember that Putin, when he was in that interview with Tucker Carlson, right, that these people have brought up, he was like, don't you have a border to fix? Don't you have a national debt to service? These are the things that he was pointing out, and these are the talking points that we're seeing time and time again from these new right influencers, all right? Congress cares more about rising food prices and food scarcity in Ukraine than America. More than $5 billion to alleviate food scarcity and rising prices exacerbated by the war in Ukraine. A reminder, once more, there are 365 million people in the U.S., okay? This amounts to $15 a piece. This is nothing. Like, do you have a comprehension of how much your average American makes a year? Like, how much your average American pays in taxes a year? How much your American corporations pay in tax? Like, this is, again, it's nothing. It's $50 per person. It's nothing. It's nothing. Like, literally nothing. Yeah, like, your average person probably spends that on funding, I don't know, crossing guards in their district. Like, just, lawn care in their district. Like, literally. Like, just people who are paid to go and mow lawns, mow grasses in the summer. Like, they probably paid that, like, at least that. Just ridiculous stuff, right? Just ridiculous stuff. Alright, so, biolabs again. No, biolabs. So Russia says that NATO has biolabs with weapons in them in Ukraine, which is a red line. And so now NATO is saying, yes, there are biolabs, but no weapons. And if Russia releases these weapons that don't exist, that would be a red line. Cool. There's a difference between... So what you're talking about with these high-level biolabs is that there are universities that study various different forms of pathogens, okay? They're very dangerous if they get released. So, and by the way, almost, like, almost every major university that you go look at will have like a level 3 biolab or level 4 biolab, okay? Like these are very high level biolabs. They're very kept very secure. And the issue is that if certain pathogens get out, well, yes, they are at that point weaponized, right? But they're not weapons because they're weapons. They're being studied not to develop them, okay? They're being studied to go and counter them at these universities, right? Like the point isn't to go and produce masses of biological weapon material. The point is to go and, which again, like just as a general thing too, right? Like biological weapons, they're very uncommon to actually deploy anywhere in the world, right? Like the only people I'd ever see deploying biological weapons would typically be like literal terrorist organizations, for a simple reason that yes, you can go and deploy a biological weapon on someone, but then what happens when that weaponized bacteria or virus or whatever, what happens when that gets carried to you, which it will in time? What happens when that hits your population? Well, you're going to be out of luck. Even if you have a like even if you've developed a vaccine, like that doesn't always go and counter what these forms of viruses might mutate into, or what bacteria might become immune to over time, right? So it's like it's too dangerous as a weapon system to go and actually generally deploy. But anyways, but this was once more one of those major talking points that they were bringing up. Really, again, this is just weeks after Russia invaded, right? March 14th, 2022. Just I saw them all of these different influencers were suddenly bringing up biolabs, which again, it's like it's ridiculous stuff, right? Disclosed TV just added U.S. to announce a $3 billion arms package for Ukraine tomorrow, the single largest yet. Reminder, $9. Oh, congratulations, we're up to $9 per person now. You literally make that in an hour, like an hour of work for your average person, right? Lord Chen, has anyone considered that the reason why American politicians are so eager to send taxpayer money to Ukraine is that they know once it's over that they'll be able to launder it back into their personal accounts? So once more, accusing American politicians of being corrupt as far as Ukraine goes, right? Again, it like the vastness of Russian corruption throughout the Western world, right? Like just the way that they have funneled money into banks and bought off businesses, and that, like politicians, social influencers. Again, like this is the relevant corruption that we're talking about here. And of course, Lord Chen, part of the same network, right? Just one of a relatively insignificant part of the network, I should add, right? Because like even if we look at a guy like her biggest influencer, right, is Tim Pool, that is promoting the Russian talking points. Like, still not a really massive influencer from the scheme of things. Like, yes, big in terms of certain metrics, but like he's not a Tucker Carlson, right? So that's where you'd start to get to the major stuff. That's major guys there being paid off to go and do this stuff. Once more quotes Michael Tracy, who once more far-left journalist. Zelensky just used his martial law powers to ban 11 political parties, including left-wing parties, but don't expect this to have any effect at all on U.S. politicians pontificating that Ukraine represents the last stand of freedom and democracy. Yeah, so he banned communist parties and hyper-pro-Russian parties that were being used by agents of the Russians to go and spread, propaganda and hatred in Ukraine. So it's like, yeah, he banned a bunch of corrupt political parties. Once more, he's at war, and this is no different than when we were in World War II, banning the local fascist parties and sending their leaders to prison. But again, we did this in Canada. We banned the fascist party, we banned the distribution of their literature, and we sent the guy off to a very nice work camp in northern Canada. So that's what we did with our fascists in World War II. All right. But of course, for Lord Chen, the Ukrainian government, including Zelensky, is corrupt, authoritarian, and is working with neo-Nazi groups. Does this excuse Russia? Nope. But is it relevant to the conversation when NATO countries are told this is about democracy and we have to send Ukraine money and weapons? Yes. So it's more just oh no, this doesn't excuse the Russian invasion, but oh yes, it does. Look at him; he's working with neo-Nazis, and oh, he's authoritarian, he's corrupt, he's trying to go and steal our money. Does this excuse Russia? Nope, nope. We just should stand aside and let Russia do everything they want to Ukraine, right? So it's like just again, very. I think it's obvious what's going on here, right? Like this isn't even very convincing stuff, but you know, you know. Oh, here she is again. Hashtag stop Cop City. Remember, Cop City, for those who don't know, this was a major anarchist riot that they were trying to get started against like a major, it was like a police training facility that was being put up in, I think in Georgia, if I'm not mistaken. Around Atlanta, Georgia, if I'm not mistaken. But basically, they were like this massive attack on, like construction gear. There were, hundreds and hundreds of anarchists. And of course, there were tons more online. And there were all these far left groups, right? Like these ultra far left groups. So now she's going and quoting one of them. Okay. And here he is talking about the flyover at the last year's Super Bowl. Lauren Chen, if you think that's bad, wait till you hear about the billions of wasted taxpayer dollars being laundered through Ukraine. And once more, $4 billion. So, for each American citizens, congratulations. That's, what's that? Like, it's not even 5 cents, is it? Oh gosh, it's just ridiculous stuff, right? Yeah, it's way less than 5 cents. It's literally like between 1 and 2 cents. It's like ridiculous stuff. Yeah, just ridiculous stuff, right? It's like, oh yeah, congratulations. If that's true, everyone had to pay 1.5 pennies. Oh, the humanity. Biden cares more about Ukraine's borders than America's. Once more, Biden is being obstructed by the Republicans and trying to go and do a bunch of stuff. And again, you sign an agreement with a country, you have to go and fulfill that agreement. GOP, fiscal conservatism. Lauren Chen, is that what the party bosses tell themselves when the GOP helps launder billions of taxpayer dollars and equipment to Ukraine? So again, just like her assertion is, she wants her followers to be like, oh, America is hopelessly corrupt. America is hopelessly corrupt. And just, she's actually really even more of a depression peddler than even like a Trumpist. Like she has gone on a lot of rants against Trump, even though she's supporting guys who are a bunch of, in the Tenet media network who are almost entirely pro-Trump. So that probably says something there. But for her specific shtick, she wants to reel people, especially young men, I'm going to say. Like, she wants to reel a bunch of young men in by being this, cute Asian waifu, and then going and telling them, be depressed all the time, be miserable, be sad, be sorrowful, be depressed, hate society. Like, this is literally what she's doing. Ugh. Colorado bakery loses appeal over transgender birthday cake. Lauren Chen, are these the blessings of liberty that Ukraine is missing out on? All right. Human jellyfish. Mitt Romney called Tulsi Gabbard treasonous for addressing U.S.-funded biolabs in Ukraine. Well, Miss Gabbard isn't backing down and has even brought receipts. So it's like, again, now these people understand what, like they don't understand exactly what the funding for any of these things actually goes. It looks like the extent to which any of these are like actually funded by the U.S. Like, yeah, maybe the U.S. had like a grant for Ukrainians to go and study this or that pathogen. It's like none of these people ever go and tell their followers, oh, this is actually what biological research facilities are. They're literally facilities attached to universities, of which, by the way, they're only they're only going to be, again, the most major universities in Ukraine that actually have biological research facilities like that. So, at that sort of level, like a lot of universities can have like level one, biolabs, right? Level two. It's just when you get like to the level three or level four situation, right? Those start to become very highly guarded. You have to be have a lot of authorizations, a lot of qualifications. There's a ton of security measures around those, right? So, and you remember that the Russians were claiming that Ukraine was going to go and spread biological weapons into Russia via migrating birds. They literally said this in the UN, like literally gone from of the UN, all the countries in the world are like, yeah, the Ukrainians are going to try and spread bioweapons into Russia via, like migrating birds. It's just that level of ridiculousness, right? Like that isn't something that can happen. It's not something that Ukraine would be able to go and like those birds would just bring those pathogens back the next year to Ukraine. Like just ridiculous stuff, right? But they just want their followers to go and repeat that, and a bunch of these alternative media types, like they think they're again the elite thinkers, like these big brained fellows, but they aren't. They're just people who have been brainwashed into going and believing all this crap. Alrighty, scoop. Russia has asked China for military equipment and other assistance to support its invasion of Ukraine. Lauren Chen. Wow, as Western countries back Ukraine, Russia too will be seeking aid from its allies. Whoever could have seen this coming except everyone. So once more, it's like, yeah. So just starts, screaming at Ukraine, like just immediately, right? Just immediately. Alrighty. Yasser Ali, this video of Afghans clinging to a U.S. Air Force aircraft as it takes off will always haunt me. What a shameful chapter in U.S. history. Yep. Lord Chen, it was always going to end as it began, chaotic. Glad it's over and done with, yet that didn't stop the people in charge from opening up an even bigger laundromat operation in Ukraine. So, once again, as I pointed out before, none of these people understand how laundering money actually works. Like, just, they don't. But, no, Ukraine is not a money laundering operation. Lord Chen, the longer we're forced to continue wasting money, manpower, and resources on Ukraine's borders, the more dire our own western border crisis gets. And of course she's going to quote Radio Genoa, which is one of the, by Radio Genoa, if you want to know the funny thing, literally run out by a guy who's out of Cambodia, which, for those who don't know, is in Southeastern Asia, right? Like that place around, Thailand, Vietnam, Laos, Malaysia, like the sort of region, right? So, like, literally run by a guy from Cambodia, in Cambodia, right? And he goes and just spends all of his time talking about, like, various stuff in the West, and basically he's one of the biggest accounts that goes and does that whole exception thing that I was talking about earlier, where he's, like, going and presenting exceptions as the norm. So, using that to go and hyper-promote, like, the Russia-controlled countries, and then using it to go and dismiss the Western countries because it's like, once more, it's like, oh, look at these two loving teenagers in Russia elegantly dancing together. Look at this guy in the dog mask and dress in the Western countries. Like, these are typical of the countries that we're talking about. It's like, not at all. Actually, I just saw a very wonderful thread. Well, I suppose wonderful isn't exactly the way you describe it, where it was like, okay, so you want to do that, Russia, because, well, how about we go on Russian social media and then find a whole bunch of posts of your soldiers, and we're going to find them in, like, really weird, like making out together, your soldiers being really hyper gay, like, just, this is stuff that really goes on in the Russian military, like it's, like, completely undisciplined, and, stuck in, like, these isolated bases, and then you have all these guys that literally go gay or, like, just randomly have sex with one another. Like, it happens super constantly, right? And then, of course, the Russian battalion's like, oh, it's only the bottom guy that's gay, right? Like, that also just, they're, so my point saying that is that the Russians, like, everything that they want to hold up, and by the way, like, that's, this is about military discipline, right? Like, just noting that, in Russia, they want to be like, oh, we're this, what's more, like, hyper-traditionalist country and all that. So, just in military forces, just as a general note, like, it doesn't matter what your perspective on sexuality is, right? Like, the point is that you're not supposed to be, like, obviously soldiers aren't supposed to be in relationships with one another. Like, this also is something that's entirely true of, like, male soldiers and female soldiers. Like, you don't want your female soldiers getting knocked up by your male soldiers, right? Like, that's just not going to happen. We'll be looking at this video, by the way, here a bit later on. A reminder, this is weeks after the Russian invasion, okay? The crowd that usually complains about xenophobia has suddenly taken on a staunchly anti-Russian stance. This isn't limited to just Putin and his government, but even Russian music, historical figures, and salad dressing. Does the hysteria make sense, and does it help Ukraine? Because these things all build up to what you're seeing currently in Russia. Like, again, Russia's intellectuals, like, you think of only a few, like, there's been, like, a few pacifist Russians that are like, well, we should go and be this hyper-expansionist country, but the vast majority of their thinkers are guys who are, like, either supportive of it, or you have, like, your Dostoevskys who were literally beaten into submission despite their initial resistance to the system, right, where it's like, Dostoevsky, he's an anarchist, right, he doesn't want the Russian Empire, but then he gets tossed into a gulag, right? Imperial Russian gulag, and then he suddenly goes hyper orthodox, right? And then becomes this staunch supporter of the Russian state. Like, it's this, so there just isn't this sort of undercurrent where, Russian culture has things that can say against this sort of Russian imperialism. No, Russian culture is very much focused on being this big man, and this is why they've been very much, throughout their history, this is why we've had so many, Europeans be like, there's a lot of problems with Russia, right? Like, it's not, and Russia, of course, tries to go and use that to say, Western Europeans, they just hate Slavs, and Central Europeans, they just hate Slavs. It's like, well, people don't have exactly these same sorts of notions about, Romanians or Poles or, Czechs or all these groups, right? So there you go. But yeah, it's like, we'll look at that video later on. A new crisis, Ukraine. The money from Pfizer is nice, but Raytheon pays too, right? So it's like, this is an assertion that Keenan Bex, what is the scientific explanation for the abrupt stop at new variants, right? So what's my point this out, that it's simply a tendency of viruses to just become less dangerous as time goes on, right? So there have been new variants of the coronavirus, okay? Just they're not very dangerous compared to what they initially were. So basically, it's just like, this assertion that you go from crisis to crisis, right? Just incorrect. Important thread. This is not meant to detract from Ukraine, but it's relevant because war is always bad, but not only when the media chooses to cover it or it trends on Twitter. If war crimes sicken you, there's a lot of Western actors that need to be held accountable too. So you're going to note this, right? Just this whole, this whole tendency to want both sides. This is what the libertarians do when they want to claim to be, reasonable. It's like, we want the Western countries to be held accountable for, their atrocities. It's like, then you look at the level of the atrocities, right? It's like, so there are cases, for example, right, in Iraq, for example, during the Americans, where they were doing peacekeeping in that Iraq, where it's like, there were cases where they, for example, bombed tents that had, they thought were with militants, but they ended up being like a wedding tent that, ended up killing 80, 90 people, right? So and that's bad, right? That's bad. There's that very famous WikiLeaks one with it, which is the helicopter, right, where the Americans accidentally went and shot up in a helicopter when shot up a van that had a couple of men, some kids in it, right? So that we're just like a photographer family, right? So killed a number of them, right? And so, they were reported, and yeah, so that was something that very much was shocking to a lot of the world. But then you look at that on the scale compared to what Assad has done, right? Where Assad has killed hundreds of thousands of people, and he's forced millions of refugees, right? Just this is the sort of scale that you're dealing with here, where it's like, oh, somehow we're going to go both sides of this like it's the same deal, especially when a lot of the vast majority of casualties that you're looking at in Iraq, right? The vast majority of them were like the Saddam's forces were like running this covert operation in the country, and they're going to do stuff like, oh, we'll go and shove a landmine onto a highway, right? And it'll blow up, destroy, a couple of cars with it, right? And that happens constantly. Like, I've seen videos of, people almost, like, literally almost getting hit by these landmines, and they're massive, right? Like, they literally leave, like a crater that's tens of meters in length, okay? Like, this is like a really massive explosion from these landmines that they've simply gone and, put all over the country. So it's like, just ridiculous stuff. And this war is always bad thing. Again, war is not always bad. Like, this is that is an extremely naive perspective. But, well, it's not even naive in this case, right? She's just being corrupt. But, it's not always bad. Then Lauren Chen, considering I'm called a traitor for not pledging loyalty to Ukraine and Israel, being criticized as unpatriotic for not supporting American foreign policy is really one of the least weird accusations I've faced. A reminder, she's Canadian, so she's just in the U.S. because of the tax purposes, and because if she was in Canada, she might actually get, some pushback for some of these things that she's talking about. Although, nowadays in America, they're actually starting to crack down on these influence operations. So there you go. There you go. But at this time of 2022, you'd get more criticism in Canada for taking these positions than you would in the U.S. In Ukraine, if the separatist regions actually want independence, I support that. Some people question whether the majority of people actually want it, or if it's just Russian agitators. I feel like answering that question should be the first priority in assessing the situation. No, you do not get to separate from a country just because you have a separatist movement. That's not how it works. Most countries have legal territorial integrity. The only times where they don't is when there is such a disruption, a potential for one country to, one part of it to leave that's been granted autonomy. So, for example, you had like the U.S., which is like, okay, the Philippines, if the Philippines wants, it can go and leave America, right? It's a territory. If the Philippines wants to, it can go and be independent. The Philippines voted to be independent rather than a state, so the Philippines became independent, right? All right. So, but yeah, you don't get to do that. Just bust off a region of a country because some people there want to be their own country. Like, that's not how it works. And of course, like, the validity of all of this, we also note that, like Crimea, for example, that was conquered by the Russians, right? Like, they did that in complete opposition to the actual group that was indigenous to the area, like the Crimean Tatars, right? So it's like, this isn't, like, it doesn't matter if you've gone and infiltrated a bunch of people into a place. It just, and of course, like, we know that a lot of the separatists, they got what was coming to them as well, right? Because, like, your Igor Girkin, for example, he's now rotting in a Russian prison because for his troubles, of all the troubles they went through to go and create the Donbass situation, just because he started to be critical of Putin, and, well, now little Igor Girkin gets to be thrown in prison. So, very good. Igor Girkin is a sad potato. Alrighty, but I was told any neo-Nazis in Ukraine were impossible because Zelensky is Jewish. I was assured of this. Once more, this is like, this is probably her responding to one of those BS Russian photoshops where they've gone photoshopped in like a Nazi-style flag where there isn't actually one in the actual photo. Yeah, me not being pro-U.S. foreign policy and critical of what happened in Ukraine since 2014 doesn't default to me being pro-Russian. Yeah, that does actually. It does. Again, you'd be pro by omission or anything, but of course with her, we now know her little shtick, right? We now know what she's like. Um, I've written on the Ukraine situation, which also supports IR being a lesson in performance double standards. All right. It's not the same as supporting military action against Ukraine. Ukraine shouldn't have been shelling Donbass. Russia shouldn't have destroyed Ukraine military installations. The West shouldn't be backing coups in the region. I'm not pro any actor in this conflict. Yes, you are. Clearly, it's like, yep, you are. And by the way, remember, like, the militias in Donbass, they were, like, literally shelling the Ukrainians. Like, literally more Ukrainian civilians get killed by those rotten little Russian militias than, like, the Ukrainians ever killed in shelling. And the only reason, really, the Ukrainians ever got, inflicted casualties on civilians was literally because those raw, crappy little militias insisted on, like, sticking their artillery pieces and their rocket launchers just right next to apartment buildings, right? It's like, we're using these civilians as shields, and then whenever you go and slam into, one of your artillery shells goes and hits one of these inhabited, apartment buildings or housing complexes or schools or whatever, well, now we're just going to say, oh, look at you, you're rotted, you went and killed some civilians. Exact same mentality as Hamas, right? Like, we'll just go and stick all of our facilities, and so then we'll say, we stick about 50 militants in schools, and we go launch rockets from outside the school. Then we go, oh, how dare the Israelis go and hit this school? Like, Mr. Leader of the UN, will you go and do another one of your little tweet dances for us? Like, just crap, right? Utter crap. Utter crap. Alright, there are videos of African women being denied seats, not just men. Not saying this is a good situation, but it seems Ukraine is giving preference to their own citizens when it comes to evacuation, which isn't the same as racism. I have absolutely no idea what this is referring to, but, like, is it referring to there being, like, foreign students studying at Ukrainian universities or something? There are Afro-Ukrainians, but there are just not that many of them, so I'm not sure what she's talking about. Oh, then, these are two posts I want to note from her, which is, this is actually what she was like in, 2021 and 2017. Okay, so 2021, this is from China Xinhua News. If somebody gives me just one example of the Communist Party of China imposing its ideology on anybody outside Chinese borders, I would be grateful. Russian Ambassador to China, Andrei Denislov. Lauren Chen, the people of Tibet, Hong Kong, and Taiwan would like a word. Such interesting. This could actually be a good benchmark for when did the money start flowing in for Lauren Chen. So that's interesting. So July, keep an eye on this date. So it's July 8th, 2021, before the war. Alrighty. The idea that race equals cohesion is debunked by the tensions between China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan. Each group is culturally different. By the way, so she was born in Canada. My understanding is that she spent a lot of time in Hong Kong during her early years, and then presumably moved back to Canada when it came under, Chinese control or whatever. Would that be... might work. But anyways, and then we get up to... Okay. August 16th, 2021, Lamau, the U.S. was never going to help Taiwan or Hong Kong. We have no oil or resources. This does kind of identify with Hong Kong there, interestingly, you'll note. Lauren Chen, and this is from, again, 2024. That's why I'm suggesting no money to Taiwan, and especially no money to Israel. So, there you go. Turned entirely on Taiwan, being an actual society worth defending, right? Now that she's been paid off, oh, suddenly Taiwan doesn't deserve any money. Israel doesn't deserve any money. Ukraine doesn't deserve any money. We're not going to go and rebuild, Gaza after that war ends, right? All these different things, okay? We're going to go look at this video later on. And this is an interesting person that she's interviewing. So it's Keith Woods. So Keith Woods, for those of you who don't know, is one of these like Zoomers, and he's hyper anti-Israel, and he's one of the bigger anti-Israel voices on Twitter. Okay, so again, one of these new right guys, right? So, and this is Lauren Chen interviewing him, which just goes to show you what exactly she has gotten herself into. Or what we should say, who exactly she considers ideologically aligned with her. Lauren Chen, is the TikTok ban really about protecting Americans from the Chinese Communist Party? Or, as Keith Woods suggests, is it more about silencing young voices critical of Zionism? So very interesting, right? Very interesting. So, again, once more, anti-Israel, moving really more into the anti-Jewish category, but we've always seen that from that Tyler Hansen guy, right? Being hyper anti-Jewish just as a whole. Kamala Harris is an AIPAC shill, just like everyone else in the U.S. government. So you'll know, right? Just everyone in the U.S. government totally, utterly corrupt. Totally a society against its citizens. Everyone's sold out to Israel, blah, 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 right? America is fighting Israel's war, not the other way around. I'm pretty sure it's Jewish soldiers and Israeli soldiers and Druze soldiers and Israeli-Palestinian soldiers. I'm sure all these soldiers are the ones that are literally fighting that war in Gaza. That's it, last I checked. Western civilization existed before Israel and is not dependent on Israel for its continued existence. Accurate. The same cannot be said of Israel without Western support, however. Maybe, but you know what? Israel has its own allies, and even something like Israel, for example, getting in with the Saudis and India, which it's doing, like that's completely an alternative to the West for support. So Israel could exist with just those allies; it would be fine. Replying to Jake Shield, who would you and Nick Fuentes like to debate on Zionism who might actually agree to it? So, I don't know why you'd bother debating Jake Shields or Nick Fuentes. Nick Fuentes is like an increasingly irrelevant figure who's just one of these guys who's devolved into just saying whatever is edgy on the internet, and Jake Shields has been punched one too many times in the head and he is now stupid. So, there you go. He had by the way, boxing... he had a boxing career, guys. That's why we say that about Jake Shields. He, just say that he took too many blows to the head. Laura Chen, Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, gave a 2-hour dissertation on Russia's history and its place on the world stage. Meanwhile, Joe Biden, the head of a Western hegemony, could not finish a cohesive sentence in a 5-minute, carefully choreographed setting. So there are plenty of Western leaders who could give 2-hour dissertations. I could go and give a 2-hour dissertation on Canada, the West, if you want. But more to the point here, there are plenty of Western leaders who have given hour-long speeches and that, and et cetera, right? But here's the thing. Like, she's promoting this Tucker Carlson interview, right? Like, again, like all these people do. No, she uses Western hegemony, okay? Again, she's using their language, right? Using their language. She's promoting their leaders, okay? And this is from February of this year, all right? So just, yeah, it's kind of obvious what she is, what she's doing. All right, as a Canadian, telling me I should care more about geopolitical foes than domestic ones because China and Russia abuse human rights just doesn't have the same effect it once did. Well, guess what? Your geopolitical foes are going to influence you in their domestic side. Yeah, of course. We see that with Lauren Chen, right? Alright, so Trump was installed by Russia. What you're saying is American elections are not secure. I keep forgetting whether believing that constitutes a treasonous attempt to undermine democracy or not. All right. By the way, the point isn't that Russia literally got Trump elected. The question was, to what extent did Russia interfere and try and like take votes away from Hillary Clinton, promote narratives against Hillary Clinton? It's not that Russia literally got Trump elected. It's just, did they go and sway things enough that they got him elected? That was kind of the question people have. All right. I'm not saying Canada's flat out worse than China/Russia. Flat out worse, very interesting, but Trudeau is absolutely a greater threat to my freedom and safety than Xi or Putin, so yes, I will prioritize accordingly. All right. Putin explicitly pointing out Russia's grievances clearly offers an off-ramp to the war. NATO stops expansion eastward. U.S. stops meddling in Eastern Europe. Negotiations over contested ethnically Russian oblasts. These are the same points we've heard from Russia since 2022. So in other words, just give Russia everything that they want. Tell Ukraine to go away. Just ridiculous things. It's like, literally, well, the actual off point is for Russia to stop being so imperialist and to leave other people's countries alone. And literally, flipping the script on everything. Look at this, right? Just flipping the script on everything. Russia censors Western media because Russia is fascist. Western countries censor Russian media because Russia is fascist. Did I get that right? Their censorship is authoritarian, but ours is anti-authoritarian. What's more you do? I don't even need to respond to that. And this is an interesting round, right? She's responding to Brian Lilly, right? This thread from Brian Lilly, who was saying it's time for Canada to stand fully with Zelensky in Ukraine, right? So Brian Lilly is one of the most prominent conservative commentators in Canada, conservative journalists in Canada, right? Writes frequently for The Sun, these sorts of organizations, okay? And so, yep, she's going to, of course, being a new right person, she's going to go and pick a fight with them because, again, these are the sorts of people that they need to destroy to get their new right into ascendancy over all of the right-wing discourse, right? They need to go and take out the more traditional conservatives, all right? Canadian columnist wants Canada to declare war on Russia and commit the entire armed forces to fighting. This is what happens when you live behind a screen and start to believe your propaganda, right? Yeah. All right, and this is her little this is her controversy. We'll go over this video, right? Because she was one of the people who once were trying to get Ben Shapiro out of the conservative influencer section, right? She just wanted him out. And so they were trying to do this with the Crisis King, which is trying to go and force an issue between the Jewish conservatives and then Christian conservatives in the U.S. So they wanted them to be fighting. And we've seen time and time again that Lauren Chen hates Israel, right? So this is all coming from that. This isn't a natural thing. If it wasn't clear already enough, Christ is king. Spreading his word isn't anti-Semitic. It's about sharing love and faith with everyone, Jewish folks included. It's what we are commanded to do as Christians. Cross. All right? So again, we'll look at that video later on, but just ridiculous stuff, right? I just had to grab the light there. So here's an interesting one. She's quoting Andrew Tate, which, a reminder, all these people love to quote Andrew Tate. Candace Owens interviews Andrew Tate. Tucker Carlson interviews Andrew Tate. All these guys love to quote Andrew Tate. Andrew Tate is, once more, literally a pervert who is a pornographer, who abused women, who has links to organized crime. This is who Andrew Tate is. He's a terrible, terrible person. He's trying to do this whole shtick of where he goes, oh, I'm a trad Muslim now, right? I'm a trad Muslim. Remember, so the typical shtick that you see from your European types, right? Or Euro-Americans, all these sorts of things, right? Is where you go, oh, I'm now a trad Catholic, or I'm an ortho bro, right? Orthodox or Catholic. And in this case, with what you see with African Americans, Afro-British, this sort of thing, they oftentimes go, well, now I'm a traditionalist Muslim. So there's Andrew Tate. There's another guy that I know called Sneeko, I believe. These are like frauds, right? Complete frauds. And they're both the types who have done this just so they could have this sort of credibility, right? And so now, Andrew Tate, as a Muslim, it warms my heart to see the resurgence of spirited Christian declarations. Christ is King. Lauren Chen, interesting that I have yet to see a Muslim person take offense to the whole Christ is King controversy. Some are even proclaiming it themselves. Just, you see the absolute fraud here, right? Yeah, of course they're not taking offense because you're literally using it as an anti-Jewish bludgeon. Like, literally. Just ridiculous stuff. Like, I will have to do like a video on Jesus one of these days, because guys, like, you have no idea. Like, you really have no idea about this guy. Like, just, if you did, you wouldn't be as aware committed to us following him as you would, like, you think you are. Just, anyways, to everyone lamenting that those proclaiming Christ is King aren't merely using it as a statement of faith, you're right. People aren't just using it as a statement of faith. It's also a statement of fact. Apparently, it's becoming a statement of intent. What I see people writing Christ is King, what I see are people saying they intend to stand for Christ, even amidst those who tell them not to, and who try to silence them. They're saying they intend to be bold in their faith, even though it may make some people uncomfortable. They're saying that despite the backlash, they will proclaim Christ's divinity, because though the world might call them extremists, ultimately they will be guided and assured by the simple truth that through it all, Christ is King. So you see again, like, just this ridiculous religious bludgeon, right? It's like they use what's more, this in a lot of ways this has very little to do with a sort of doctrinal Christianity, right? They just want basically a religious metaphysic that goes and justifies what they want to do in society, okay? Which is, authoritarian system that is anti-democratic, right? That is restrictive to only people who agree with their own little group, right? And so basically, these religions like that they go and embrace, like Christianity and Islam, right? These have built-in ways that you can go and set up society in an us versus them way, right? They're fundamentally come from supremacist cores, right? And so what happened in the modern world, right, is that the sort of Christianity that succeeded, right, is the sort of modernist Christianity. And so it's people who are like, we don't really want to go and be this whole supremacist types anymore, right? In Islam, there are a few places that are like that, but in a lot of cases like that, that's still a process that's developing. But, there's some Muslims too, right, that have that sort of, we're not going to be in this supremacist mindset, right? So the thing is, though, that what they want to do by getting people into these sorts of hardcore mentalities is it's like, oh, this is how we're going to go back to the past glories, right? We're going to go back to the past glories of Christendom or the past glories of the caliphate, right? And then we'll go and shape society, and then it'll be us and we who appreciate the Christendom or the caliphate, and we're going to be the ones that lead it all. And then there are going to be all these other people, and they're going to be forced to bow before us, right? Because they're worthless. They're they're far less than us, right? They're just these degenerate modern types, right? Like, this is what they want to go and tell people to do. And that's what this whole Christ is King business is about, right? It's about a statement of theocratic intent for America, where it's like we want to go and have all of America become forcibly Christian. Remember, it's like this is the exact opposite of what the founding fathers want, right? Founding fathers, they were either like deists, right, like your Thomas Paine's, Thomas Jefferson's, this sort of thing, or they were actually part of Unitarian Christianity, right, which is like this idea of Christianity, but essentially universalized, where you just don't have the sort of doctrinal obsession, you don't have this sort of supremacist mindset. So these are the sorts of mindsets that the founding fathers had when they were going for, America, right? And yeah, it did always go and work out that way, but that's why you have, freedom of religion. That's why you don't, you actually have like the Native Americans that have their own religion still, rather than being, forced to be Christians like you saw in, South America and Central America under Catholicism, right? So just all this sort of thing, right? Like just ridiculous stuff. But it is just a political bludgeon, and you should always go and read it as a cynical political bludgeon. And then this is just to show that, you know, these people do have their effects in the world, right? So here we have Lauren Chen and Lauren Southern, right? So they're giving a big, they're big part of a conference in Canada, right? This big conference in Canada, Reclaiming Canada. The We Unify Reclaiming Canada conference this June in Victoria, BC.
It's dreadful, awful, the worst place around. So stinking, creaky, morally unprofound. This country's gone down the drain, and I'm ashamed to call it by name. Scream so much on Twitter, but still nothing seems to change. Getting really ticked off hearing something's gotta change. Things around here ain't perfect, and that's not right for me. Things around here ain't perfect, so let's burn the stage and street. Got a new game plan to shake things right up. You can play at dirty, don't need clean hands, surely. I'm talking on the internet, engaging in free thought. People are talking shit, and my head bobs as I agree. Things around here ain't perfect, and that's not right for me. Things around here ain't perfect, so let's burn the stage and street. Got a new game plan to shake things right up. You can play it at dirty, don't need clean hands, surely. Been talking on the internet, engaging in free thought. People are talking shit, and my head bobs as I agree. Got a new game plan to shake things right up. You can play at dirty, don't need clean hands, surely. Been talking on the internet, engaging in free thought. People are talking shit, and my head bobs as I agree. So now I think you, should I be poor, can get a sweet payout for spitting truths, and with thoughts I won't be ignored. Regretting your choices yet? I laugh at so-called countrymen. I don't owe you scum any loyalty time, cause you're the enemy to me, and the man in Moscow agrees. I'll call you Satan, you like how that sounds. I'll call you globalist, you like how that sounds. I'll call you communist. Oh hey, my check from Beijing just clear, where was I? Oh yes. I'll call you banksters, you like how that sounds. I'll call you devils, you like how that sounds. I'll call you, well, whatever I'm told to. This is the truth movement, baby, we tell truths here. The ones we're paid to tell. We're all about the truth and about the money. Call myself a hardcore Christian, so I'm gonna praise China's new system. Only critique is internal, yo, cause evil from only one source does flow. You're all Satan, we're God. Well, dear leader in Moscow, you're looking for a deal, got a complete package for you, and here it is, if that's alright for you. I'd sell you my mother for a nickel. You can have my soul for a dime. Sell out my country for $1, and humanity for a $5. Oh yes I do, oh yes I do. Freedom's collapsing everywhere, and I'm cheering it all. Oh yes I do, oh yes I do. I welcome our new overlords. Oh yes I do, oh yes I do. Freedom's collapsing everywhere.